Okie dokie, there you go. You can start, Keisha.
Okay, and I apologize beforehand because my cat's trying to get some camera time today. But thank you all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us this morning. Today's disability awareness workshop will help us to be more sensitive in our interactions with people who have disabilities. Today, we'll be challenged to increase our understanding, eliminate preconceptions, do away with outdated thinking and language, and improve our communication with people with disabilities. Today's spring speaker brings more than 20 years of digital marketing and operations experience, having worked with Blue Cross Blue Shield and Prudential. Bill Kaiser joined Delta in February 2017 and serves as the Director of Digital Strategy and Marketing. While preparing this intro, I said, wow, Bill, that sounds like a really heavy title. What exactly do you do? He took a sip of his Diet Coke. By the way, he loves Diet Coke and drinks it just for the taste. And he responded, not much. I'm just responsible for developing strategy, execution, measurement, and analytics for digital and marketing initiatives. Additionally, Bill recently fulfilled his term as chair of DDPA's Web and Mobile Advisory Subcommittee and leads the company's digital steering committee. In addition to his regular role in digital marketing while at Prudential, Bill was also an active member of several business resource groups, including VetNet, which serves veterans, Eagles, serving the LGBTQ community, and he served as the chair of ADAPT, which is the business resource group that supports the personal and professional development of employees living with disabilities. It is my pleasure to welcome today's speaker, subject matter expert, and our esteemed colleague, Bill Kaiser.
Oh, thank you, Keisha. What a great introduction. Thank
And you
Good
said the
morning.
check was in the mail, right?
I'm so flattered. That's awesome. So good morning, everybody. It truly is an honor, and I appreciate being given this great opportunity to speak to all of you about a topic that I'm very passionate about. My intention today is to create awareness around the importance of things we say and do, as well as opening your mind to something you can carry with you into all areas of your life. In addition to being a marketing director, I'm a husband and a father. I'm fortunate enough to be the father of a wonderful 20-year-old son who has special needs. I say fortunate not only because he's a great boy, man, but the fact that he has special needs has opened my eyes to so many experiences and parts of life that I would not have known existed were it not for him. He absolutely has made me a better man and a person. I want to share some of what I've learned along the way with you today. So we're all people first. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen, am I? I should share my screen. I'll do that. Sorry, folks. We're all people first. Yikes, that guy does not look happy. Some of the words you see on the screen are used every day by regular, everyday people, people we know, people we love, maybe us ourselves. And those very words are used to describe and identify people with mental and physical disabilities. I just want to get a thumbs up. Everybody can see that screen? Is that true? Okay, good. Thank you. So even good people, open-minded people, people who consider themselves progressive thinkers use these words. They're in our everyday language, unfortunately, and without realizing that their negative impact on people, perceptions, and even more importantly, public policy. But they're just words, right? Aren't they? Well, the words we choose represent our beliefs. Beliefs that some people are not good enough, inadequate, not valuable, a burden, or something less. Words like these disenfranchise people with disabilities from education, employment, social relationships, and basic human rights. Words devalue people. Words dehumanize. And worst of all, words fuel dislike, hatred, and stigmas. So 2 great leaders in this area of study stated that language tends to shape beliefs around a person's potential, needs, and desires. And that vocabulary itself can orient an entire perception in the public mind. Pejorative and negative words not only bias a person's understanding, but trivialize genuine community support for people with disabilities. We need to find better words, the right words that represent our support. I like this one from Mark Twain. The difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and a lightning bug. I like that one. It tickles me when I read it. We want to use people first language. So we see the person before we see the disability. We want to acknowledge who a person is, their potential, their needs, and desires. I have a few examples of how to communicate with and about people with disabilities. I'm going to preface this with, these are to the best of my knowledge from the research that I've done. There's not necessarily a one size fits all, and I'll go into that in a little bit. But let me run through some of these just to kind of hopefully open your eyes.
Excuse me, Bill, I don't mean to interrupt you, but can everyone please be sure to keep themselves on mute? Thank you.
All right. So let me go through a few of those examples here. So instead of saying disabled or handicapped person, just say a person with a disability. Instead of saying confined to a wheelchair or a wheelchair-bound person or a woman who uses a wheelchair. I have also found wheelchair user is also acceptable. Instead of saying autistic person, it's a person with autism. Instead of saying an epileptic, a person with epilepsy. You'll see a pattern start to emerge here. Instead of saying afflicted by MS, say a person with multiple sclerosis. I've heard CP victim, spastic. Just say a person with cerebral palsy. Gosh, no, not dwarf or midget or vertically challenged. I think people are trying to be nice or maybe just funny when they're saying vertically challenged. Just say a person of short stature or a little person. And as in most cases, for most of these things, only refer to someone's stature if it's relevant to the story. Instead of saying birth defect, just say a person with a congenital disability. I know it's a little harder, it's a little longer, but it's nicer. This one is disturbing. Instead of saying slow, retarded, or mental retardation, those phrases went out 40 years ago. Say a person with developmental, learning, or intellectual disability. Instead of saying a Downs person, or mongoloid, or idiot, person with Down syndrome. Instead of saying terms like he's special needs, or oh, he's a special needs person, he's a person with special needs. Instead of saying brain damaged, a person with traumatic brain injury. Terms like cripple, invalid, lame, gimpy, handy-capable. I think people are mostly trying to be nice when they say handy-capable, but just say a person with physical disability. This one drives me crazy. Don't say nuts, crazy, insane, not playing with full deck. I broke my own rule, my own guideline advice earlier today, and I'll call myself out for it. These things are hard because they're in our everyday vocabulary. They're in our everyday language. Just say a person with mental illness, a person with mental challenges, people with mental disorder. It's what I've read about this one in particular is, an inanimate object can be crazy. The weather could be crazy, that kind of thing. People are not crazy. So keep those words to things that are not human beings. That's probably a better way to look at that one. Alcoholic, meth addict, pothead, someone with alcohol use disorder, person with substance abuse disorder, nicotine addiction, that type of thing. It's those other words tend to be more hurtful. If somebody identifies themselves as an alcoholic, perfectly fine. What I'm referring to is how we refer to other people. Deaf. So this one is interesting, and I studied this one over the summer with a couple sign language classes that I attended. And of course, there's some education around the deaf community. This one's slightly different because the deaf community has sort of embraced the word deaf, and they use a capital D because they're proud of deaf, and they're proud to be deaf. Again, hard of hearing is also acceptable. Describing somebody as deaf, or if somebody identifies themselves as deaf, it's a capital D when we refer to that. And it's always best to ask how the person identifies. Not everybody who has hearing loss or is hard of hearing, identifies as part of the deaf community. So it's always best to sort of ask how that person identifies if you're going to have an ongoing engagement with that person. So now I want to go through some basic guidelines of interacting with people with disabilities. This is not a whole inclusive list. These are sort of just the top ones that kind of bubble to the top that we can all kind of keep in mind as we go along. So, there's one easy rule: don't assume. So don't assume that a person with a disability either wants or requires assistance. And that a rejection, this came up in our questions, that a rejection of aid is meant to be personal. It's not. Sometimes people are using things, sometimes people open a door, they're using that door to steady themselves. You go over and you just open the door on them, you could cause them injury because they were using that door to hold themselves up. Or maybe you wanting to hold a door for somebody. I keep using that one as an example because it's something that we run into in an everyday life situation. Sometimes you holding the door for someone gets in somebody's way. So if they say, no, thank you, just don't take it personally, just be on your way and let them press the button and let the door open for them so they have the full wide berth of the doorway to get through. But in all those cases, ask, don't assume. Don't assume that if someone accepts your help, that without being told, you know what service to perform. Wait for them to tell you. Don't assume that a person who appears to have one kind of disability also has or doesn't have others. Don't assume that a person with a disability is less than satisfied with their quality of life, or that they're seeking pity, or that they're anything less than anyone else. Don't assume that a person who doesn't appear to have a disability is faking a disability. We've had that in our questions as well. Many disabilities are invisible. In fact, probably the majority of disabilities are invisible. Many don't require assistive devices that can be seen, or they only require them intermittently when the person needs it. Don't assume that a person with a disability will be receptive to personal questions, especially in public. I'm going to go back to that one for a second. I think that when we have children, children are naturally going to ask questions. Children are naturally going to be inquisitive. It's a great opportunity for a teaching moment with that child. It's not necessarily, don't say that. It's tell them about the person's condition and why it wouldn't be appropriate to ask those things at that setting. Take them home and talk to them about it. I think it's a great educational moment because children are naturally inquisitive. So a few guidelines. Don't pet someone's service animal. We know they're cute. We know they're adorable. You know, working animals are almost always working all the time. Even when they're just laying there, they're working. Don't touch someone's assistive device. Most people consider their assistive device an extension of their bodies. Don't touch someone's wheelchair. Even if it's you're, you know, trying to do the right thing and, you know, get down to somebody's level so they don't have to crane their neck to look up at you. Don't use their wheelchair as a brace to brace yourself. Find something else or tough it out. Don't comment on, stare, point, or other action regarding someone's disability or condition. I've run into this. It's rude, it's classless, it's hurtful, it's annoying. I'll stop there. Do speak directly to the person with the disability that you're working with or you're engaging with, not their companion. The person with, if the person with the disability asks you a question, you know, or you want to, you know, ask a question about what floor they want to go to because you'd be willing to press the button for them like you would anybody else, talk directly to them, not to their companion. Only ask questions about someone's disability if you know that person. And I would even add, if you know that person well enough to ask those kinds of personal questions. Don't help. This comes up a couple times. Don't help unless you ask first and are then given permission first. So remember, emphasize the person, not the disability. And if in doubt, just ask the person their preference. It's probably the best, safest thing to do. You want to get to know somebody, you're going to have an ongoing relationship with somebody who has a disability, ask them their preference and how they like to be preferred, you know, how they like to be referred to. It's something that is just so simple. And I'll leave that at that. I think that's, if you take away one thing from this, take this one away. Just ask what the person's preference is. Because I think it's time that we start putting people first. So thank you. With that, I'll turn it back over to Keisha. I have a few helpful resources up here that, you know, I'll work with the D&I team to see if we can't get this set of links out. This is not a full list of helpful resources, but it's some of the ones that I've gone to learn about, and there's some organizations in there that I support and have done some great things with people with disabilities. So if you're looking to learn about those types of things, and also I put this out to anybody else who's a parent of somebody with disabilities and you'd like to learn a little bit more, you know, I've got 20 years in on this. You know, I'm willing to talk. So if you want to email me separately or reach out to me separately, I'm always willing to talk and share ideas around, you know, finding programs to help children or other loved ones that you know that have disabilities. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Keisha. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. We did receive a few questions prior to today's event in email. And if anyone has questions, please feel free to type them in chat and I will ask Bill. First question we received, is it rude to ask a person about their disability? It seems like it would be rude to bring it up unless the person does, but it also feels like it's rude to not mention it. What's the correct etiquette?
It's a really good question. And I think that it doesn't necessarily have a right or wrong. I think it depends on how well you know that person. If you're having a one-time interaction with somebody, you know, in a mall or at a food store, you wouldn't ask about their disability. Well, if you get to know somebody, you're going to have them over for dinner, you're having coffee with them or something, sure, you can, but more likely it's that they're probably going to bring it up. People will talk about that, but I don't know if there's a right or wrong, but I just definitely wouldn't be asking somebody about their disability. It probably just a good rule.
Okay. Our second question, what lessons can we learn from others with a disability, such as resilience? Can you suggest some activities to stay connected with our friends with disabilities?
So I think it's fine. There's a lot of inspirational stories out there. To be inspired by anyone's achievements, anybody who achieves something that is admirable, you admire them for doing it, or maybe admiring someone's perseverance. But I'm going to take that just a step further and expand on that question. I wouldn't go up and congratulate somebody, for achieving, passing the bar exam or graduating college or some other big event by saying, wow, you did this and you have this disability. It's just, you did this. That's a great accomplishment, and leave it at that, just like you would anybody else. I'm sorry, Keisha, there was another part of that question. Is it rude? No, that was the other question. It was the inspirational thing, and then there was something else I thought.
And it was, can you suggest some activities to stay connected with our friends with disabilities?
Yeah. So, it's tough with COVID. I mean, obviously, it really sort of depends on the person's disability. I would use, and again, this is my personal opinion at this point. I would treat them as though anybody else. We have Zoom meetings, we have Zoom family get-togethers. If they have assistive devices that help them to use tools like Zoom, great. If not, I'm sure we can find other socially distant things. The weather's getting warmer, we can do things outside, and we can gather together and deal that way if the person is unable to work a Zoom or that sort of technology. But I really wouldn't look at it any differently than somebody who doesn't have a disability. The only thing that would, I think, change that would be, someone's inability to use the technology that we're used to. And then maybe it's you talk to them about what technology do you use, and maybe you learn what that technology is, so that, you can make some of those more safe, socially distant ways of staying in touch. Learning sign language is a good opportunity. Learn a few. There's a couple links up there. I have Signing Savvy and LifePrint. Those are great for, you want to learn a phrase just so that so you have a couple in your back pocket that you can practice. Those are always good to kind of go through. You can just type in a phrase or look up a phrase, and it'll show you in a video a very easy way of learning how to do those things. So that's another way of staying in contact with people. Were there any other questions?
Another question, can obesity and pregnancy ever not be considered disabilities, but perhaps a disadvantage that we should be more empathetic about and consider in some contexts?
I don't know if I'm the right person to speak about pregnancy. I see it as a wonderful thing, but obviously it's a big strain on the mother who's carrying around this child or children. But I think that they're always classified as a disability because it does limit their ability to engage fully in activities that maybe they were used to doing before and that are sort of temporarily on hold. So yeah, I think that they're probably always considered disabilities.
This is a great question that we just got in chat. Are we, Delta, or should we rename the certification of handicapped child form that we use?
Yes, probably. However, there may be a legal term, and I'd have to default to Paul DeMayo on that to make sure that, because there are certain rules that even the federal and state governments don't always comply with what's socially acceptable, and they follow what's legally written. So there may be times where we have to use the term, a certain term in a certain way on legal form. So I mean, I'm willing to take a look at that with Paul. But yes, those are the types of things that that we'd be looking at changing. And just so folks know, one of the things that I'm working on with the company is to try and make our website, because it's something that I control, and forms that we put up on the website to make them more accessible, so that somebody with what's called a screen reader, so someone who's visually impaired, someone could go through and they have what's called a screen reader, and it naturally reads what each field is, so the person can stop and then type in what that field is. Or things like tabbing. We sort of take that for granted. Not everybody uses tab to navigate a form, but making sure that tabbing flows in a logical order across the page, or that things are grouped together. There's some thought that goes into that. So, I'm always looking at things like that to make improvements, to bring things that are considered web content accessibility guidelines, to bring those to Delta. So, naming the forms would be on that list as well. So thank you. That is a good question.
Okay. Should I bend down to talk with someone in a wheelchair?
That's a good one, because there's a number of different schools of thought. The way I look at it and what most research shows, and this research comes from surveys of speaking to people who are in wheelchairs, permanently, that if you're having a very short interaction with somebody in a wheelchair, it's perfectly acceptable for you to stand and look directly at them, and for them to look up towards you. But if you're going to have a more long-term conversation, it's much more appropriate for you to get down at somebody's level, mostly so they don't have to crane their neck up and look up at you. Try and find a chair nearby. You sit down on a bench or a chair, and then you're right there at the same level. But for short interactions, there's not a reason for you to bend down, unless you need to whisper them a secret that you don't want everybody else to hear in the area. So I think you play it based upon how the length of your interaction, and sort of the information that you might be sharing. If the information that you're sharing is a little bit less public, maybe you get down to a little lower level just to kind of share that information. But standing up for short periods of time, perfectly acceptable. But if you're going to have a longer conversation, get down. Really, a lot of it is because you don't want that person to have to crane up to look at you. Any other questions?
Yeah. There's another question in the chat. Keisha.
This one's more of a personal question for you, Bill. As a parent, what challenges did you and your family face, and how did you overcome those?
Well, I think that when you find out that you have a child with special needs, I think that you face personal challenges. I think it's sort of a roller coaster of things that, it's normal to kind of go through. It wasn't what you expected. It's not what you anticipated, but it's a different path. And that new path doesn't necessarily have to be a negative path. That path, like I started off my talk, turned into something really great. I mean, there are things that I'm aware of now in the world that I never would have known. But the one that I referred to on the screen, about it's rude. When I was talking about how it was rude and annoying for people to point and stare and stuff like that, that's very hurtful. And it's hurtful to have someone come up and say, "What's wrong with your kid?" You know, and or "What's wrong with your kid's face?" or something like that. And it's like, "What's wrong with your face?" And you get angry and you want to lash out at the person. And it's sort of that ignorance is probably a big challenge. I think that fighting, when I start off the conversation, I put in there public policy, because there is a lot of, I don't want to, I guess it's ignorance, or a lot of pushback from from education, for having to fight a school system to make sure you get the right, you get the right accommodations and so forth. I mean, a lot of public programs and a lot of institutions don't make it very easy on people with disabilities. And I think that, it's unfortunate, but the laws are great. And, I think that people having to fight for these things, I think the financial penalties that companies face and that organizations face are warranted, because it's the only thing that really makes people do the right thing sometimes, especially companies, is the fear of, getting sued, or, having some sort of penalty. So really running up against those things, I got to say things are getting better. Every year that goes by, there's a new thing that's going in. And I'm glad to see that the new programs that are being put in place, the executive orders that are being put out by this new administration, do include language for people with disabilities. So I think that those things are going to get better. But yeah, I mean, I think fighting public policy, fighting perception, fighting ignorance, I think those are some of the biggest challenges. But I think that when you find groups and you find like-minded people, and you can share your stories and you can learn from each other, I think that that's one of the biggest things that helps with that type of thing.
Bill, it's Barry. Do you mind if I just add for a second?
Sure.
So some folks know, probably most don't. I share something very in common with Bill. We have a 28-year-old son who has both physical and intellectual disabilities. I can't agree with him more that some of the biggest challenges is navigating the process, whether it's school or other resources. He's working now, but finding the right situation and finding the right support, it has definitely been a challenge. I would say on the positive side, I really liked how you approached it about being people first. And probably the biggest thing you learn is not to assume, because no child with these disabilities are the same. And in fact, even the children themselves are now young man, he's 28. There's certain things that he is all over mentally, and there's certain things that just go over his head. And probably the biggest challenge as a parent is understanding all those, what we call channels, what things he's going to be all over like any other 28-year-old, and what things he's just not, and making sure you're giving him that freedom, but also the support depending on where something lands. But he's, probably like Bill would say, you have to get to know the person as a person like you would anyone else, because our son Alex, he's witty, he's hysterical, but if you make assumptions about what he is or isn't, you wouldn't get to know that, and so I think the assumption. And the last thing I'll say on a positive side is, when you do start seeing the support of the community and the people, and I'll just point, it's just one organization, but the Special Olympics, they are absolutely some of the most wonderful people you will ever meet. So, when you're always looking for the silver lining to the cloud, the fact that you had the opportunity to meet and get to know people like that is obviously a big positive.
Love that. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you, Barry. And we're getting a lot of questions in chat, Bill. So the next one what would be an appropriate way to ask someone if they need assistance?
Oh, hi, can I help you? I mean, it's really, I mean, people with disabilities are just like everybody else. If they don't have a companion there with them, and you see that, yeah, maybe they can get from their ride on scooter and lift the groceries into their trunk, but it's going to be a struggle. You go up to them and say, I have an extra time and some hands, can I help you with that? A lot of times they'll be like, oh, great, thank you. But if they don't, that's fine. This is part of, who they are. Don't take it personally. Just walk away, feel good that you offered, and walk away from that experience as positive. I think really just as simple as I was speaking with my son last night. I was preparing for this, and it's one of those things where, oh, would you like me to hold the door for you? And they may say no, because you're standing in the doorway, because you're holding the door, and they need that space to kind of navigate through that doorway. So they may say, no, thank you. And you say, okay, and have a good day, just like you would anybody else. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of different scenarios. It depends on the, on the situation, and the person's specific disability. If they would like, a chance to help crossing the street, because you can see they're walking with a white cane with a red tip. Would you like me to walk with you across the street? It's a pretty busy street right now, or there's a couple of potholes in the street. I'd like to help you navigate. You can, I mean, those things are all perfectly normal, but always be prepared that the person may say, no, thank you, or I got it. And you say, okay, great, have a good day, and walk away from that experience that way. I hope that answers the question.
So the next question is piggybacking off of the wheelchair question. This person asks, would it be the same etiquette for a little person when speaking with them, like getting down to their level?
Yeah, I think if it's a longer term conversation that you're having, if there's a bench available, I'm not saying you have to get down on your knees and kneel on the uncomfortable ground or something. I don't know if I have the perfect answer to that, because I haven't experienced that specifically myself. But from what I've read about the Little People of America, they prefer to not have to look up at you if possible. If you can get down to a chair level or a bench or something, or if you can find yourself in a position for a longer conversation, it's a nice courtesy. But again, it's really up to the person. Some people are very comfortable in their stature and they have no problem. So I think you have to take it on a case-by-case basis, at least from what I've read.
Any suggestions about how to deal with someone with Tourette's?
Wow. That one I have really no experience with. And that is not one that I have read about personally. So I'll have to circle back on that one. I don't, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for that one. But I really, honestly, I haven't read anything about that. I think my gut, if I ran into somebody like that, I would really sort of just ignore how Tourette's manifests itself, and try and pay attention to the actual communication the person's trying to get across. That's how I would deal with it personally. But again, I have no prior reading or information to share on that one in particular. That's a good question, because that's one for me to take away and learn about.
Not a question, but a suggestion. Someone wanted to form a Delta Dental Parent Alliance for support. It looks like Lois wants to connect with you and the person asking the question following the discussion.
I would love that. I welcome it. I support it. It worked great at Prudential when we had ADAPT. A little bit about those BRGs. the business resource groups are they're sort of like social gatherings at the heart of it, which actually provide a business value to the business. So they, not only do they have a support network, but they also supply valuable insight when we're developing products and services. And like Dr. Keith is working on the special needs network. This is the type of group who could lead or put people in contact with other people. So, we're each made, let's say there's a couple dozen of us in the company that have this experience. Well, each of us know probably a couple dozen other people outside of work. And so that becomes a big network that we can kind of ask questions and run things by. So that's a very valuable thing, both for the parents or other caregivers or even, family members. That could actually also supply some value back to the company. So I would think it's a win-win.
Yeah, and Bill, I've received a few messages about that from other folks as well. So I think that's something that we can talk about and look toward. I think it's a fantastic suggestion from Lena in the chat and from the others that I've heard from.
Yeah.
So thank you for being
Sounds
open
like
to that.
Yeah.
Sounds like we have our first business resource group.
Like it.
Very good. I got to say, there was a little piece of me that when I said I'd share my story, and I had to decide, do I share that story or not share that story? But I have found that I've learned so much from other parents who have gone through this. One of the things I've committed to in my personal life is to try and be open so that I can welcome those sorts of questions in. And if I can help one or two additional people navigate the system, as Barry had said, then I feel good that I've done something and I had a purpose. So, any other questions?
Yes, talking point here. It says, please don't take this disrespectfully, but addiction and alcoholism is a disease, not a disability. Did you want to address that?
Oh, you know what? Absolutely. It is an illness, like a lot of other illnesses. But I mean, I guess cerebral palsy sort of is an illness. And, there's a lot of heart disease can be a disability, but it is also an illness. So there are a number of illnesses that cross over, but I don't, I will be the first one to apologize. I never mean to offend. And I'll be honest, having a talk like this, it makes me nervous, not because I'm nervous about talking in front of people, but I really don't want to offend anybody. And I know that some of the things that, I'm the first one to admit, I think I mentioned it in my talk. I broke my own rule this morning. I was talking to somebody about the crazy weather and, it's that kind of thing. I try and avoid those words, but I know they sneak out. And if I offended somebody, I sincerely apologize. I think that something I said before everybody else joined is I think we all try and do our best. We all have good intentions. I mean, the fact that there's 170 people on this call, that's more than half of the company, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, what a great thing that Delta Dental has done to enable and to give a platform and time. I mean, I think the call center was shut down so we could do this. I mean, this is a wonderful opportunity for people. And the fact that everyone showed up tells me that this is the right company. They've got the right feeling, they want to learn about these things. And I myself also still need to learn. I am not perfect. So if I said something incorrect, I apologize for that. And thank you for the education.
Okay, next one is, would PTSD be a form of mental illness, or would this be something of a disability because of how it affects people who suffer from it? As you have said, some illnesses or disabilities you cannot see on the outside of a person.
Correct. I think I think PTSD sort of it's both. It's an illness. It's an illness and a medical condition. A mental health condition, but it is also a disability because it creates stress and anxiety and fear, and it does stop somebody from leading their fullest, their fullest life, or maybe that's not the right way to say it, but it does limit them on certain things. Some people, I can't even enjoy fireworks anymore because, it scares the heck out of me. And so I can't do that. Or there are certain things, certain triggers for people with PTSD. My son is studying to be a music therapist in college. And that's one of the areas that he's looking at is, helping people with PTSD. And whether it's from, we all think of the military, but there are plenty of other violent acts that occur that cause PTSD in people. And I think it's something that's still has to come a long way. I think that it's still something that has sort of entered the conversation, but I think it's still pretty new and people are still trying to figure it out. It's, as an example, it really kind of bothers me. I don't know anybody in particular who has PTSD, but I know there are people in the neighborhood who have PTSD from being in the military. And it annoys me to no end when people are shooting off fireworks in their own backyard, and your neighbor could have PTSD. First of all, it's illegal. Second of all, it's so rude and obnoxious and selfish. And, and if you enjoy fireworks, more power to you. That's great. But don't do it in your neighborhood where people should be able to feel safe in their own home and not feel, constantly violated. And they don't limit it to July 4th. They do it for a week before and a week after. It's ridiculous. At least in my town. I don't know, maybe that's not in your town, but in my town, people are overboard with fireworks, I think. Anyway.
My town too, yeah.
But it's one of those things where it's fun for you, but you don't think, so the next time you're at a party and they say, hey, let's do fireworks, maybe we don't do fireworks. It's that kind of thing. And if we can get one person to stop, it could help somebody else. That's my personal platform on that one.
And I think this is a wonderful ending to our question section. This was shared by Doug, who says, once I set up at a craft show and the man next to me was handicapped, in quotes, selling his crafts. He was saying to customers made by handy capable people. I always remembered this. He sold many, many items like the spirit was with him.
Yeah. So I think that's great. And, I know I brought up the handy capable thing earlier. Maybe that's kind of what triggered that. And one of the things I was talking to my son about when I was preparing for this is I think if someone self-identifies as handy capable, I think that's perfectly fine. I mean, I know my wife volunteered as a young person at what used to be the ARC, but now it was turned into the Cerebral Palsy Association, and she knew a gentleman that she's still in contact with, 30 years later, that he calls themselves, well, we're handicaps. Oh, us handicaps do such and such and such. If they identify themselves that way, perfectly fine. But, for somebody who's not in that community to identify that group that way, I think that's where it kind of goes, So in that case, I remember seeing a T-shirt from a speaker. I think he's in one of these lists of the Instagram accounts, where his shirt says, I'm in it for the parking. It's okay to have some kind of levity or something about your own situation, but for somebody else to say it about them would be completely, I think, overboard.
Yeah, Bill, I think I remember asking you about differently abled.
Right.
And you said that was sort of passé.
Yeah, I think we've gone past that. And again, these things change. And 2 years from now, it could be very different. And one of the things I had to consider before I did this, before I went in to do this talk is, wow, I've been out of the circuit for a year because we really haven't seen anybody. We've been sequestered in our house. Really, just the three of us. We don't even go out food shopping. I go and do curbside pickup for that kind of stuff. So things may have changed. And as we have seen, the world has changed in the past year. A lot of things have changed. A lot of movements have come up. And, people are identifying differently, just the identity politics and all that kind of stuff have changed. So that means that some of these phrases may be changing. So what I'm telling you today is good for today, or at least was good for me and what I had as my knowledge from a year ago and what I could study on for preparing for this for the past year. But a couple of years from now, it may become passé as well. And we may go back to using terms that were like, oh my God, I can't believe we're saying that again. But, just lots of things like that. So Lois, that term may come back in. Right now it's not, but who knows?
Who knows? And those are the kinds of conversations our diversity council is having. We had our inclusion group that did the empathy session a week or so ago, had a great conversation about, what we'd like to be called and what we, is it Black, is it African American, et cetera. We had a good conversation on, is it gay, is it lesbian, is it queer? People have different, they identify, as you said, the identification politics, they identify differently. And that's why these business resource groups are so phenomenal. So we keep the dialogue going respectfully and in a way to understand one another.
Yeah, some of those terms, right? So deaf was an example. Queer, that queer was like when I was growing up, you never called somebody queer. No one would ever identify themselves as queer. Like that was a slur that you used against people, and it's now has been taken over and owned by that community. And that's sort of why these things change, because sometimes the community, like the LGBTQ, and I think there's a couple of other letters now, plus community. My wife is also she is in her school, she is the, what do they call chairperson in a school? So advisor. She's the advisor for the Gay Straight Alliance in her school. So she comes home and tells me these, and I'm like, really? We use that word again now? So she keeps me educated on that as well. So there's a lot to learn. It's a never-ending pursuit of knowledge. And that's one of the things that's really good about this. And I'm going to say it again, it truly was an honor. And I appreciate the D&I team giving me this great opportunity to go through this stuff. I think it's been a great conversation. I love the questions that came in. I think it's been wonderful, and we'll keep the dialogue going.
Yes. Thank you so much, Bill, and everyone. We had a total of 170 people participate, as Bill mentioned before. To me, I think that's great, and that just says so much about how we support each other. So we're going to end the call today, but stay tuned for what's coming up next. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Have a great day.
Thank you so much. Have a
Thank
great day.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Stop recording.
Thank you.
Thank